Okay, so the topics that we are going to cover today is the topics that we will be covering today is, let me share the screen. We will be covering topics like custom directive, and in that we will be covering annotations like directive, then post binding, post listener. We will also cover what is element ref and concept of renderer 2, renderer 2. What are these classes? Okay, that is what we will cover. And second thing that we will cover in this video is use of annotation view child and @view children. Okay, so let me save these notes. So 14 December, custom directive and view child. Okay, now you are already aware of @component annotation. @component annotation. Why do we use @component annotation? For component, like you had created a book component, suppose. So when you say class book component, you give what? Selector, right? You give a selector for it. Say my book. And then you will give rest of the things, like you will give the template URL, CSS style, CSS that you will give. Then this you are going to give where? You are going to give inside the component annotation, like this. We'll give these details here, and then you are going to code class book component with properties like book name, string, etc. And this you are already aware of. When you want to use this component, we are going to call this as custom component. When we want to use this component inside our app component, what do you do? Inside app component HTML, or wherever you want to render this book components template, this my book dot component dot HTML, wherever you want to render this template of my book component, how do you render it? Inside app component dot HTML file, wherever you want to render it, there you will use that selector, my book, right? Okay, this you are already aware of. We have covered this portion already. So for a custom component, when you want to render a custom component, how do you render it? Using this custom tag. My book is the custom tag. This custom tag is going to direct what? It's going to direct Angular. It's going to direct Angular to do what? It's going to direct Angular to instantiate and load what? My book component in place of this particular custom tag. Okay, so this custom tag, or we also call it as a custom directive. What it is going, why do you call it as a custom directive? Custom, why it is custom? Because it is not inbuilt tag of an Angular. It's neither a HTML tag, it's neither an Angular tag. We are creating a component class and we are creating the custom tag to render that component over here. So it's custom made. Next, it is directive. Why? Because it is directing the Angular to instantiate my book component and load its template in the place where this tag is placed inside component template. App component template, wherever this tag is placed, your MyBook components HTML template will be rendered over here. Such kind of custom tag or custom directive is called as component based custom directive. Okay, which you are already aware of. Now, what we are today going to learn is a attribute directive. Attribute directive. Okay. So what is attribute directive? For example, suppose, to give you example, suppose I am using this div, and in this div, I am writing something, say paragraph. I am writing hello, how are you? Okay. And now inside this element, div element of HTML, it could be inbuilt element of HTML, or it could be any of your custom element also, like MyBook also. Inside this HTML element, suppose which attributes you can use inside this? You can use any of the inbuilt div attributes. Okay. Whatever the inbuilt attributes of div element, HTML element, you can use that in MyBook, whatever MyBook input element attributes are there. Suppose in MyBook, suppose you have used this as @input. This you already know. That's why I'm showing you. If you use this as a book name as an input property, then you can bind to that property over here. So these things you can use. Apart from that, okay, suppose you create your own custom attribute. What are the HTML inbuilt attributes? Like for if input element you are using, then type equal to text, value equal to say Namrata, suppose. Now this value attribute is a inbuilt attribute of HTML input element. But suppose I want to create my own custom attribute apart from value attribute. Suppose I am creating a attribute called as change value, or yeah, change val. Or suppose I am creating a custom attribute called as new val. Okay, I am creating a custom attribute called as new val. And whenever I am using this custom attribute, I want to do something. Like when you use value attribute, it means something. It means that the text field value of this input element is going to be Namrata. When you say type equal to text, this type attribute has some meaning. In the context of input element, type has some meaning. Similarly, whenever you are creating using your own custom attribute, okay, you want this input element to change in some way. For example, maybe when I'm using this new val attribute, I want to change the value inside the text field from Namrata to say Rahul. I want to change that name from Namrata to Rahul, suppose. Whenever I'm using this attribute. Okay, understood. Additionally, I can go one step further and I can say that whenever I am using this attribute and whatever name I am assigning to it, that is the name that it should have. Okay, that is the name that it should have. Initial name is Namrata, but later on, because I'm using this custom attribute, I want that the value attribute of input element should change to Arjun because that's its new val. Okay, you can call this custom attribute, let's instead of new val, let's say new name. Whatever name, whatever attribute name could be anything, new name, new val, it doesn't matter. The thing is, it's a attribute. Okay, it's the attribute that you are using. Attribute could be that same attribute you can, custom attribute can be configured as an input property also. You can configure it as input property and assign some value also. When you assign value, this new name is going to assign name to what? To this input element. It's going to modify it in some way. In this case, maybe let's say it's going to modify the value attribute of the input. Or suppose when I'm using this div and I am going to use an attribute called as highlight. Again, this is not an inbuilt attribute of an HTML. I am creating my own custom attribute. And when I will create, I will implement it in such a way that whenever I use a highlight inside a div element, the entire div element will get highlighted with some background color. Let's say yellow. Okay. It will get highlighted with a yellow color. Moreover, I can also say that whenever I take a mouse, any event capturing, any event handling also you can do that. Whenever I'm using this attribute and I'm taking my mouse on top of this div, this highlight color should change from yellow to say cyan. When I take mouse over it, when I hover outside, I take my mouse outside the div, it should revert back to its original color, that is yellow. So when I hover on top of it, it will change from yellow to cyan. When I take it outside, it will change from cyan back to yellow. So I can say that whenever I take mouse on top of input element, the value of that input element will change from Namrata to Arjun. When I take mouse outside this, it will revert back to Namrata. Okay. Or I can say that no, when I click on this paragraph, its font should, when I click on this div, suppose I use one more custom attribute. I create one more custom attribute called as mini font, suppose. That is the name of my custom attribute. Or say mega font. So whenever I use this attribute, I want that the font color, size should change from this, whatever font size is there, say 100% font size or 40%, 100%, whatever size is there, its font size should increase 5 times or 4 times. Or whenever I hover on top of it, or if suppose not, if you don't want to capture a mouse hover event, you can capture any another event. Suppose I click on this paragraph, I want that its font size should change. Okay. So I want to bind to that particular event. Okay. Where I want to bind it, whenever I'm using this custom attribute, I want to do that. So using this custom attribute, you can change the font size of this particular paragraph at the start itself, as well as you can make changes to it by capturing a particular event. If you don't want to change its font size at the start, but you want to change it when I click on it, you can code it in that way. So it is up to you how you code for this particular custom attribute. But one thing is for sure, that when I use a custom attribute inside this host element, why is this host element? Paragraph is a host element. Why? Because I am using this attribute inside this element. So if I ask you what is the host element for this custom directive, the host element is paragraph. For highlight directive, what is the host element? The host element is div, entire div. If I ask you for this new name attribute, whenever I am using new name attribute, okay, what is the host element for it? It is the input element, is the host element. Okay, so I want to use this custom attribute. Okay, and say here also you can use the attribute new book name. So whenever I am using this custom attribute, I want that something should happen. Maybe the name of the book should change to something, from Angular to something else. Okay. You might say that I want to change it on click of it. When I click on the my book tag, at that point it should change. My book template or component, when I click, it should change. You can capture any event, and in response to that, you want that whenever this attribute is used, something should happen. So you are directing Angular that whenever this attribute is used, the host element should change in some way. Whenever, again I'm repeating, whenever you are using this custom attribute, you are telling Angular that the host element is going to change in some way. That host element could be inbuilt HTML element, or it could be your custom element. Okay, understood? It could be your custom component element, or it could be your inbuilt HTML element like input or field. Okay, so that is what is attribute directive. So whenever you want to create an attribute directive, what is the way you are going to create it? Like for component, which is a component directive, you use @component annotation. Similarly, for a directive, what you are going to do is, for directive, you will create an annotation called as directive. Suppose that for highlight directive, custom directive, I want to create a directive, custom directive called as highlight. So I will give like this, and in this I will say what? Selector. Because you have to give that attribute name, right? custom attribute name. But because it's the attribute name and it's not the tag name is there for a component. For a attribute directive, it's that particular name, whatever directive name will be there, it will be appearing as an attribute. Okay, so whenever you want to give the selector, that is going to be attribute. So the syntax is whenever you give an attribute directive, it has to be inside square bracket. The square bracket denotes that it is a attribute. It's an attribute directive. And then you will obviously, because it's a standalone component, if you want to create a standalone component, then you will give it as true. And then your class will be there, export class highlight directive. And you can start coding it. Okay, understood? Now what you will do, how you will code inside it, that we will see. Okay, but you have to code in some way. You have to code in such a fashion that whenever this particular directive is used inside a host element, that host element should get highlighted with a yellow color or any of the color, which you can take from end user. Okay, which color you want to highlight, you can take from end user. Okay, so let's try to code this. So you understood what is a custom directive? Difference between a custom component and a custom directive. For a custom component, there is a HTML template associated with it, and you render a custom component using a component selector, which is a custom tag. So whenever you use a custom tag inside app component.html or inside a parent component template, whenever you use a tag, what is going to happen? You are directing Angular that in place of that custom tag, you render the component associated with it. You render the template of the component associated with it. Like inside app component.html, whenever you use my book, wherever you place my book components template will be loaded. So that is a custom component directive. Now, if you want to create a custom attribute directive, you will create it like this. And how to use this directive once you create it, this highlight directive, how will you use it? Wherever you want to apply it, whichever tag you want to apply it, you have to place it inside that particular tag. So for div tag you want to apply it, you will place it over here. So if highlight attribute is doing the job of highlighting that element in whichever element it is placed, then you will see that div gets highlighted. If you place that highlight over here, if you place it over here, if that directive is placed over here, you will see that entire my book component template, whatever it is, if you are rendering book details inside it, you will see that it will get highlighted. Okay, understood? So wherever you want to use an attribute, you will place it inside that tag. Okay, and the host element is the tag in which you are placing that attribute directive. Now let's code this. Let's go ahead and let's see how to create a highlight directive. The main thing what you are going to do over here, you have understood that whenever you are using attribute directive, I said that it's going to change the host element in certain way. Either it will change the background color or the foreground color, some style of that element it will change, or some property like text property of an input element it will change. If it is a table and you are using a custom directive inside it, it might change table in some way. So you will see that when I say that it is going to change the host element in some way, it means that it's going to do DOM manipulation. Okay. If you're changing the background color, it is DOM manipulation. If your input text property, you are changing whenever you are taking mouse on top of it, then you are listening to the mouse event. And in response to that mouse event, you are changing the text property. So you are doing DOM manipulation at runtime in response to the mouse hover event. If I say that whenever for this paragraph mega font attribute, if I say that when you click on a paragraph tag, it will change its font size. Again, you are responding to that click event at runtime and you are manipulating the paragraph element, manipulating the DOM and the paragraph element text property to change it in some way. Okay. Text property, you might inner HTML property, you might change inner HTML property, or you might just change the font size, but you will manipulate that particular element in some way. How to manipulate element? By changing the DOM. When you change it, it has to re-render it, right? If you manipulate that element, it has to re-render it into the, re-render that part of the DOM into the UI. Angular will do that for you. You don't do direct DOM manipulation in Angular. If you had it been that it is a JavaScript and you want to do the same thing, what you would have done, you would have this paragraph would have had some ID value like P1. It would have had some ID value like P1 or P2. And then you would have said document.get element by ID P1. And then you would have modified the inner HTML property or the style property of it to change its background color. So there then set style you might have done, or you might have set the inner HTML property. So that kind of a change that you do is a direct DOM manipulation. Here also for input, you could have given an ID value as in1, and you could have accessed this element document.get element by ID in1 dot value equal to so and so, and you could have changed its value, and you could have changed its value on the say on mouse move event. You can listen to the on mouse over event or on mouse leave event, and in the listener of that event you would have accessed this in1 document input element document.get element by ID in1 dot value equal to Rahul, and you might have changed it. So that is a direct DOM manipulation. But in Angular, you don't do direct DOM manipulation. You try to change the element in an Angular way. You try to do DOM manipulation in an Angular way. So directly you won't access the element. Okay. You will indirectly access the element and manipulate it. You will indirectly access the element and manipulate its properties, or manipulate its style, or manipulate its class attribute, whatever manipulation, DOM manipulation you want to do for the host element, you will do it by accessing it indirectly. Okay. Now, how you will do it? Let's see it. Okay. So I am sharing this. I'm sharing the code with you. This topic I have covered in the morning session. Okay, those who were absent in the morning session, I am just recording this video for them so they can go through this video and cover up this topic. Okay, so you see over here, there is a example called as Angular EX6 custom directive. Okay, and this example I have already copied on the GitHub. If you'll go to GitHub, okay, you will go to GitHub over here. You will see that I have already copied that example. See this Angular ES6 custom directive. Custom directive added. Okay, so you have to download it, and then after downloading it, you have to extract that from the zip file, or if you're cloning the repository, then you can access this. Do npm install so that all the libraries are installed. Or if you don't want to do npm install, copy the node modules folder from the sample application. Once you copy node modules folder or you do npm install, then this application will work. You can start and check it out using ngserve. Okay. So currently I already have this with me. So I am just running it. Okay. So come here. So see this custom directive. So I'm going inside it and I'm saying ngserve -- open. So meanwhile, let's do a quick recap over here. So directives are instructions to the DOM. Directives enable logic to be included in Angular templates. Components are directives with view templates. So components are also one kind of directives, but they are associated with a template view. Whereas what we called as directives, which we create using directive annotation, those are without the template. There is no HTML template associated with it. it directly manipulates the host element in which that attribute is placed. Okay. So see this like this. So this is a custom attribute. You can use it as an input value also, input attribute also. In that case, you will assign a value to it. Okay. See how you see this. Can you see this? App highlight. App highlight. This colon will not be there over here. Just app highlight. Whatever this name you are using, same name you will use over here. Okay. So you will write like this at the @ directive. Okay. So let's try to create it. So see this. See this example. It's already working. Okay. Now let's see what is being done over here. So let's check out the code. Go to the source folder. In the app folder, you will see that open the HTML template. See this div. Can you see this div? Inside this div, I am using this directive called as app highlight. This is a custom directive. Okay. And I'm creating this custom directive in this particular file, highlight directive.ts. How to create a directive? The nggc will create a component. Nggd, D for directive. Nggd will create a directive file. Okay. And how you will, as I said, you will give a selector, and because it's a standalone class, standalone directive, you will say standalone colon true. ओके कंपोनेंट में जैसे आप स्टैंड अलोन ट्रू बोलते हो, अगर वो स्टैंड अलोन कंपोनेंट है एंगुलर 17 यू कैन फ्रॉम सिंस एंगुलर 17 you can create a standalone component, so you can create a standalone directive in a similar fashion. Okay, and then you will see what I am doing is I am using this input properties. Two input properties I have declared, default color and highlight color. Okay, I am assigning some value from the start inside my code, but because I am using @ input means I intend to pass the value from outside this tag. Wherever I will use whatever the host element is there, app highlight attributes host element, which is the host element of app highlight attribute div. There I intend to use this input attributes, default color and highlight color. The input properties, sorry, these are the input properties, and this is the custom attribute. So this default color and highlight color are the input properties. You already know how to pass values, assign values to the input properties using @ input. So that is what I am doing. Default color and highlight color. Original values are this, but from parent, I am passing these values are yellow and cyan. Okay, understood? And after taking these input values, input property values, what I am doing, you will see that I am using an annotation called as host binding. Host, what do you mean by host? Host is the element which is hosting this attribute. App highlight attribute, which is the element which is hosting this attribute? Div is the host element which is hosting app highlight attribute. So when I say host binding, means I am binding to this div. I am binding something of this div. Okay. What I am binding of this div? I am binding to the style.background property of this host tag. Which is the host tag? Div tag, in which I am using that custom attribute. I am binding to the style.background property. Now style.background is the inbuilt HTML property. Style means the CSS style. Okay, understood? If I want to bind to any property of a div, like I want to change this value. Okay, so I want to change this value, then inner HTML property inner HTML attribute I want to change. Then I will use attr dot whatever property name. Like say for example here suppose it's the input element and I want to change its value property. Then I will say what I want to change the attribute. So if for this input element, if I want to bind to this property, value property. Okay, see here also I'm using this directive, right? My directive. So this file is there, my directive.directive.ts. Okay, in this directive is coded, my directive. Yes or no? Understood? and I am binding to, see this, in this directive, I am binding to the two properties of my host element. Who is the host here? For this directive, who is the host? For this directive, this input tag is the host, because here is where I am using this my directive. And which properties, which attributes and style of host element I am binding to? I am binding to the style.background property of it, and which is the background color, and also I am binding to the attr.value. Value is the attribute. Which attribute? This attribute, value attribute. I am binding to this, okay, and I am assigning a variable to it. Now, what this I am doing? I am binding this property to this my text variable. I am binding style.background property of my host element to bk color variable. Now, what is going to happen by this? Whenever I change my text value, it is going to reflect in this attr.value. Meaning, if I change my text value from Namrata to Rahul, let's say I change it from Namrata to Rahul. Currently, whatever the value is, initial value is what? Initial value, let's say initial value is Sita. But if I change it, if I change my text value to something, okay, understood? If I change it to something, say in ng on init, I am setting it to this dot name. So you will see that that name will get changed. Okay, why? Because this dot name is what? This dot name is an input element that I am taking. Okay, at the rate input name, which I am passing from here, name equal to Namrata. So that Namrata will go inside this name property. And when my directive ng on init method will be called, I am assigning the same name to this my text variable. But this my text variable is bound to which attribute of my host element? attr value. Which is the host element? Host element is the one in which I am using this directive. So it is binding to the value attribute of my host element, which is having this directive, that is input element, value attribute. So it's going to change. Okay, so just see it. I am adding this after this paragraph. This will not change this. After that, I'm adding this input element in the UI. See this, can you see? The name is changed to Namrata. Initially, it was Sita at the start, but in ng on init method, immediately, as soon as this in my component, my directive, in this case, my directive is instantiated and it gets displayed over here. Okay, so this, I am using it inside this input element, and this input element is part of what? This input element is part of app component.html. So as soon as my app component gets initialized and its template gets rendered, as soon as the template gets rendered, this input element will get rendered. And when this input element is going to get rendered, Angular is going to see that this is a custom directive. So it's going to search for a class associated with this custom directive, and it is going to create an instance of it. As soon as it will create an instance of it, it will call its constructor, and immediately it is going to call the ng on init method. When the ng on init method of this directive will be called, the name, the value attribute will be changed from Sita to, it will change to what? Value attribute will change from Sita to this particular name. Which name it will change? The name input element which you are binding over here. Here you are binding it, right? So name is what? Namrata. So it will change to Namrata. That is what you are seeing over here. Okay, understood? Okay, so it's going to be Namrata. But then you are seeing this, that whenever I am hovering mouse on top of it, it is changing to Rahul. Again, when I leave that, when I leave that particular text field, okay, mouse over event is fired, mouse leave event is fired. On mouse leave, the name is reverting back to Namrata. When my mouse is on top of it, it is changing to Rahul. Okay, so for that, I have to listen to this mouse event, and for listening to this mouse event, which is an annotation that I will be using, the annotation that I will be using for listening to this event is See this, host listener. Host listener is used to listen to the host element event. Which is the host element? Input is the host element. Any event associated with that particular host element, to listen to the events associated with it. It might be a click event, mouse hover event, okay, change value event, any event. You can listen to that event. Event name, this is normally your standard HTML event name. You know HTML events there. These are fixed HTML event names associated with every element. So it's an input field. I am capturing the mouse enter element and mouse leave element. And what I am doing on mouse enter event, I am writing this handler. This handler will get automatically invoked whenever my mouse hovers on top of this host element. That is the input element. What I am doing in response to that, I am changing the my text property to the new name. What is this new name? This new name I am taking, again, I am taking it from end user. So see, I am taking it over here. New name is what? Rahul. Okay. So I'm hard coding it. You could have also, if you want that, instead of hard coding, I want that app component, it should come from app component TS file. Then you could have declared property also inside app component.ts, declare a property called as my name equal to Rahul, and then use that my name variable over here. So you already know input element है, input @input tag use कर रहे हो, तो either you can bind, input binding बोलते हैं, you can bind to a hard coded value or you can bind to a variable value also. Okay, if it's a variable, you will not use single quote inside it. Directly variable name you will write over here. Okay, so if you write a variable name, whatever the value associated with that variable name will be assigned to new name. Right now it's a hard coded value Rahul. So new name will have Rahul, and that new name I am assigning when I am assigning it, I am assigning it on the mouse leave event. No, on the mouse enter event, I am assigning the new name. Okay. And when I am leaving it, when on mouse leave, I am reverting back to its original name, that is this dot name, which was initially there. ng on init mein, it was this dot name. Then on mouse over, I am changing it to new name. And when my mouse leaves that particular host element, it is again reverting back to the original. Okay, understood? And this name also ng on init में जो assign किया, वो उसका starting का original name की value क्या है? वो नहीं है. Original name की value आपने सामने दी थी, वो क्या है? सीता है. बट जैसे ये इनपुट एलिमेंट रेंडर होगा, ये कस्टम डायरेक्टिव इंस्टेंशिएट होगा. जैसे कस्टम डायरेक्टिव इंस्टेंशिएट होगा, आप इसकी वैल्यू एट्रीब्यूट को बाइंड कर रहे हो. यू आर बाइंडिंग इट ओवर हियर, है ना, होस्ट बाइंडिंग APETR value my text. Or so by that what will happen, whenever you will change my text, attribute value will also change. And in ng on init, you are changing it to this dot name, which is Namrata. So first time when it gets loaded, you will see the name as Namrata. And then on mouse enter, you will see the new name. What is new name? Rahul. So Namrata and Rahul. Again, when you leave the mouse, again you revert back to that name, original name. That is Namrata. So that is what you are seeing over here. Rahul, when I take it back, Namrata. Rahul, take it back, Namrata. So you are bound to the text property of it. Next, I have also bound to the style.background property of it, of this particular host element. Okay, so see this. To change its color, what I am doing, I am binding to the style.background color, BK color. And this BK color also, I am not taking as an input property. This BK color, I am changing it in the constructor. In the constructor, not in the constructor. In the ng on init method, I am changing this BK color to pink. Okay, that's why you are seeing this text box rendered with the background color as pink. Okay, if you will change it, and if you will change it to something else, suppose I change it to cyan. Save. You will see that the background color will change to cyan. Okay, understood? So you understood host binding to bound to the style property, any of the style property or any of the attribute value. The way there is a style, there is attr, that is attribute. If class property, css class property, if you want to modify, then you will have to say @host binding. And you can say class dot whatever class you want to change. Okay, class property you want to change. So you understood host binding and host listener. So what is custom directive? What is host binding? It binds to the any of the attribute, style or class value of the host element to a variable, so that when you change the variable value, the associated attribute or the style will get changed. Okay, and you can change, you can also listen to the events on that particular host element using this host listener. One more example I will show you. Change font size. Say this app change font size is the directive, and I am host binding to which property? Font size property. Okay, and I am taking the starting font size from end user. Now let's see where I am using this app change font size in my HTML. So this app change font size in paragraph I am using this. And what is the starting font size I am having? 300% is the starting font size. Hi, this font size will change using alias for instance, whatever this name is. Its size is so big in the start. It's 300%. See this. Yeah, it's 300%. Itna bada hai. Okay. And this value, when I assign this property starting font size, how did the font size change? Okay, I'm taking this input property, and whenever I'm using this custom directive inside this, what I am doing as a part of this custom directive, इसका जो host element है, मतलब ये paragraph है, इसका जो font size property है, उसको मैं host binding कर रही हूँ to font size variable. Okay, और initialize ng on init में मैं font size को assign करूँगी किससे? starting font size से assign कर, जो कि मेरा starting font size क्या है? 300%. इसलिए वो आपको 300% पे दिख रहा है. फिर मैं क्या कर रही हूँ? मैं आप देखोगे whenever I click on this, see when first time when I load it, it's this big, but when I click on this, it's changing to a small font size. On the click of that click event on that particular paragraph. Okay, paragraph is the host element where I have used that app font size directive. So I want to capture the click event, so I will have to use host listener. So you will see that I'm using this host listener and I'm capturing the click event. You will not say on click. On click is the name of the event in HTML. You have to remove on and you have to just use that name. Okay. You are aware of this, है ना? आप input tag में वगैरह event handling आपने किया है, Angular event handling, output event binding, है ना? तो आपको पता है कि Angular में event you give in a round bracket, and when you give it in a round bracket, you don't say on click, you just say click. You don't say on change, you just say change in round bracket. So here also you will give round bracket and you will give the event name. So it will capture the click event. This is the handler for it. The name of the function could be anything, but this is the handler. Why this is event handler for click event? Because it is stopped with this host listener directive. So whenever you click on the host element of this particular directive, app change font size का जो host element है, जो कि paragraph है, उस पर मैं click करूंगी, तो मेरा font size किसमें change हो जाएगा? इस property में change हो जाएगा. ये on click font size property. ये क्या है? ये मैं सामने end user से ही ले रही हूँ. Input element है on click font size, जिसको मैं click font alias मैंने दिया है. अब ये मैं already explain कर चुकी हूँ. This is the alias, right? तो यहाँ पे ये दिया हुआ है click font. क्या है click font? 100%. ठीक है, तो click font 100% है, मतलब on click font size 100% है, और on click font size 100% है. और जब आप क्लिक करते हो उस एलिमेंट पे, तो कौन सा इवेंट कॉल होता है? होस्ट लिसनर इवेंट कॉल होता है. और फॉन्ट साइज जो है वो किस में चेंज हो जाता है 100% में, बिकॉज द वैल्यू ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर इनपुट property is 100%. So this dot font size will become 100%. But this dot font size is nothing but style dot font size. इसलिए style dot font size change हो जाएगा किसका, उस एलिमेंट का जिसमें आपने ये डायरेक्टिव लगाया है. वो कौन सा एलिमेंट है, पैराग्राफ है, तो पैराग्राफ का फॉन्ट साइज 100% में चेंज हो जाएगा. ये 100% में चेंज हो जाएगा. इनिशियली 300% रहेगा और बाद में क्या हो जाएगा 100%. 100% हो गया ना. अगेन रिफ्रेश करती हूँ, 300 है, क्लिक करती हूँ तो 100% हो रहा है, राइट. ओके, so again here also you saw that it is doing DOM manipulation. ओके, ये DOM ही तो मैनिपुलेट कर रहे हो आप. जब साइज चेंज करोगे या फॉन्ट साइज चेंज करोगे या इनपुट की टेक्स्ट प्रॉपर्टी चेंज कर रहे हो या बैकग्राउंड कलर डिव का चेंज कर रहे हो, इट्स काइंड ऑफ अ DOM मैनिपुलेशन. But you are not directly doing that DOM manipulation. You are doing that DOM manipulation via a custom directive. Via custom directive, you are doing it using host binding and host listener annotations. You are doing it. Okay. And whatever values you want to assign, you can take it from the end user using @input. Okay. Let's take 1 minute break and let's come back. Okay. Just 1 minute, 5 minute break lete, and then we will continue. So this much you have understood. Okay. ये in the morning I had created this example. My directive मैंने खुद ने बना के बताया था. हम सब लोग ने क्लास में इकट्ठा बनाया. हाईलाइट डायरेक्टिव पहले से था. हाईलाइट डायरेक्टिव वाज देयर फ्रॉम स्टार्ट. माय डायरेक्टिव आई क्रिएटेड. ओके, अब मैं फिर से आपके लिए चाहिए तो मैं आपके लिए फिर से हम बना सकते हैं बिना देखे. एंड यू ऑल कैन क्रिएट अलोंग विथ मी. व्हेन आई एम क्रिएटिंग दिस यू कैन pause video in between and you can create it step by step along with me. Okay, so after this 5 minute break I will show how to create a directive and how to manipulate the DOM. Okay, after this explanation.